Hello and welcome to Fantastic Flips. In this episode, I'm going to be refinishing this vintage solid wood cabinet. And to give everyone an update on the last video of the mid-century dresser, I sold the dresser for $180, which gave me a total profit of $120. I bought this cabinet off garage sale for $75. And as usual, I start by giving the whole thing a good cleaning, and beginning with vacuuming the whole piece inside and out. After vacuuming, I remove the drawers and I unscrew the doors from the hinges. Next, I give everything a good cleaning with TSP, followed by a wipe down with water. As you can see, there are some cracks in the drawer fronts that I'll have to repair later. Here are the original knobs. I'm going to strip and repaint them. And now I'm using this circa 1850 stripper to start stripping down the drawer fronts. Sorry about showing the French side of the label. And you want to make sure that you use a nice thick coat. And this is how it looks after it's sat for about 10 minutes. The reason that you want to use a thick coat is because if it starts drying out too soon, it won't be as effective at making the old finish bubble up. Once it starts bubbling up, I start scraping it off using a plastic putty knife. This finish that was on here was very thick and very difficult to get out, so after scraping both drawer fronts, I decided to repeat the whole process one more time. Next, I clean them with steel wool and mineral spirits. Then I sanded them with 120 grit sandpaper. As you can see, there are some black marks deep in the grain. I tried to sand them out as best I could, but they wouldn't come out anymore. But luckily, after the stain goes on, they're not noticeable anymore. I also made sure to give the sides and insides of the drawers a good sanding as well. Next, I move on to the top, and I'm going to strip it using the same process that I used to strip the drawers, and I'm going to do 2 coats just like I did with the drawers. And it's important to wear gloves while you do this because if you get it on your skin, it will burn you. As the finish starts coming off, you can notice that there are some cigarette burns on the top. Luckily, I was able to get most of it out through sanding. And just like with the drawers, giving it another scrub down with mineral spirits and steel wool. The old finish that was on this cabinet was really thick and hard, and it was really hard to get off even with the stripper. So I started off sanding it with 60 grit sandpaper. This piece is solid wood, so I don't need to worry about sanding through a veneer, so I can start with a very aggressive grit sandpaper. And then here's how it looked after I sanded it with 150 grit sandpaper. You can still see a bit of the cigarette burns and the same black marks as in the drawer fronts. Next, I'm going to go over the rest of the surfaces using 150 grit sandpaper. This is to scuff up all the surfaces and get it ready for primer. and then I sanded it by hand to make sure I got into all the corners and details. Next, I move on to the doors. I repeat the same process that I used on the tops and the drawer fronts of 2 coats, and I do that to the back and the fronts of the doors. And then again, I clean it all off with steel wool and mineral spirits, and then follow up with a good sanding with 60 grit sandpaper. I am using this Bullseye 123 primer on all of the places that I am going to paint instead of stain. Next, I am using this pre-stain conditioner from Varathane. This is used to help ensure that the stain is absorbed into the wood evenly and there are no blotchy spots. I applied this evenly across the entire surface, working it into the grain, and then I left it to sit and dry, and then I came back and gave it a light sanding by hand. I am using a Varathane oil-based stain in the color Dark Walnut. This dark stain did a nice job of hiding all of the black marks in the grain as well as the cigarette burns on the top. I'm also applying the stain to the inside and the sides of the drawers, just to freshen them up and make them look a little nicer. Although it's not shown, I did use the Varathane pre-stain conditioner on the faces of the drawers prior to staining them. On all of the stain surfaces, I am using this polyacrylic water-based clear coat in semi-gloss made by Minwax. And it's not recommended to use a water-based clear coat over top of an oil-based stain. However, I've done it many times and it's always worked fine. You just need to make sure that the stain thoroughly dries before applying the top coat. After each coat, I lightly sanded with 400 grit sandpaper, applying a total of 3 coats. Next, I apply the stain to the doors. As you probably remember from the beginning of the video, I showed you the cracks that were in the doors. I actually repaired those using wood filler. However, I did lose the footage from that. While I waited for the stain on the doors to dry, I did the top coat on the drawer fronts. I did 3 coats with a light sand of 400 grit sandpaper in between, just like I did on the top. Once the stain on the doors have dried, I applied the clear coat. Next, I am using frog tape to mask off the stained sections of the doors, and then I am going to paint and prime the middle sections. For the paint, I am using House and Canvas chalk paint in the color Underground. I also got this chalk paint application brush made by Bennett. This time I made sure to dampen the brush and apply thin even coats, and I was able to get a very smooth finish with very little brush strokes. I really liked working with this House and Canvas paint. I found it really easy to work with. I also really like that they are a Canadian company. I wasn't a huge fan of how the color turned out, however. I was expecting it to be a bit more of a gray, but it really looks a little bit more like an army green, depending on how the light hits it. I was able to get full coverage with 2 light coats. I left the knob soaking in a tub of the furniture stripper. Then I used my drill and some 180 grit sandpaper to get them nice and cleaned up, ready to paint. To finish off all of the painted areas, I used this Bare finishing wax in clear. I thoroughly applied a thick coat over all the surfaces. The directions say to let it dry and then buff it out with a rag, but I found in my case that I didn't really need to buff it after it dried. After removing the masking tape from the doors, I realized there was a few spots that needed a little touch-up of clear coat, so I just did another coat over the whole surface. Then I applied the bare finishing wax to all the painted sections of the doors. And then after that, I applied the wax to the painted knobs. After the wax dried, now they are ready to put back onto the drawer fronts and doors. Next, I reattach the hinges to the doors and put the doors back onto the cabinet. After I finished reinstalling the knobs, I removed the wheels from the legs because one of the wheels was broken. And that was the final step, so now let's take a look at the finished piece. On this project, I spent $75 on the cabinet, and then I spent about another $35 on all of the supplies, which puts my total at $110. I ended up selling this piece for $240, which puts my profit at $130. Thank you so much for watching and making it all the way to the end. I know this video was a long one. If you liked it, please check out my first video, and if you want to see more videos like this in the future, hit that subscribe button.